Hi, Kat.
Okay,
Welcome to the studio.
thank you.
Could you start with introducing Weightmans for me and telling me a little bit about your role there?
Yep, certainly. So Weightmans is a UK-based top 40 law firm. We're full service, so that means we do anything kind of legal wise. My role currently is Director of Product and Innovation. So used to be a lawyer, but now I've moved over to do all the really fun stuff.
I suppose we're talking about technology and professional services accelerators, particularly around adoption.
Mm.
I suppose I'm interested to hear from your perspective, partly about what the main challenges were that you were thinking about, and then also a little bit about why join in a project like this.
Yep, certainly. So I think this project was probably a few years in the making, and I suppose almost influenced by COVID. So it's not often we say that there's anything good that has come from COVID, but I think what it did do was it accelerated professionals' use of technology because they had to. So suddenly, people who, weren't necessarily very interested in tech at work, they were starting to use that in the home life. It was their way of keeping in touch. Any other service and a kind of thing they were using was provided in that way. So we suddenly had a cohort of people who were much more interested and expecting to use tech. And obviously, what happened to our colleagues happened to our clients. So suddenly, clients were coming back to the world of work going, wow, there's a whole load of tech that we could be using and exploring. And almost, I suppose, after that, we got the Gen AI bubble, didn't we? That
Yeah, it sort of kicked in halfway through this.
popped onto the scene. So it was almost like a perfect storm. You had a pile of people who'd never used technology before wanting to use technology.
Being forced to do it.
Yep, being forced to do it. And then you had Gen AI where you can go, hey, I've got 4 random ingredients in my fridge. What should I make for dinner? And people were using it in the home life thinking, wow, if it can do that, what can it do at work? So suddenly an awful lot of interest just in technology and kind of emergent technology in particular. And I suppose that got us thinking as a product and innovation team how that was going to impact what we did. So we've had a product and innovation team in various guises, obviously started quite small for about 7 years. And, we always go technology and innovation, it's about the people. The tech is almost the easy part. And we've spent a lot of time, effort and time on trades and everything, literally going around the offices, doing roadshows, trying to do that hearts and minds conversation, trying to explain to people why, a particular pilot was worthwhile them doing and what it would mean for their client, those kind of things. And it got us thinking with the Gen AI explosion that almost in one fell swoop, all that kind of trust and hearts and minds that we'd won could be eroded. And that's quite a scary thing to think, actually.
Oh, yeah.
We were going,
right.
yeah, we were going from a team and a firm where people were willing and keen to use this technology to actually this could really harm how we pilot and roll things out. So, I mean, for purely selfish reasons, I've got an interest in kind of trust. Did a PhD in organ donation law and wrote a chapter about it.
Right.
And reckon if I swapped out doctor for lawyer, the same would
Oh,
be true. So I
interesting.
think kind of organ donation law, it's trust in a system, isn't it? From kind of whatever laws and procedure you have in regulation. It's trust in individual doctors that they're going to act in your best interests. Nobody's going to declare you dead if you're not and harvest your organs, all of that kind of stuff. So there's so many different levels of trust going on within that I thought if you could swap out doctor for lawyer, I suspect it's the same with a lot of technology. And particularly with generative AI, and there'll be other technology that comes, what we didn't want to do is pilot technology that then eroded all of that trust we'd built up. And again, nobody wants to be the one peddling snake oil, do they? So we didn't want to be going, hey, here's another piece of shiny tech, people come and give it a go.
Right.
If there wasn't any either longevity or, end results to it. So we're always kind of piloting with the idea that doesn't matter if everything works, that's fine. That's the whole point of pilots, but you fail fast and you move on to the next thing and do it that way. And that's why we were particularly interested in trying to see how we could evolve our, I suppose, pilot practices, how we communicated with stakeholders to think a little bit more about that up front.
So then in your project, it sounds more like it was technology agnostic to a degree.
Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, it's framed at the moment around Gen AI because that's the kind of the
Show
current
in town.
emerging tech. Yeah, so we may as well have something to be able to kind of contextualize that with. But yeah, we were keener to explore what are the underlying, I suppose, methodologies and things we can put in place to really try and have trust at the focus. So I think for us, we've always dealt with stakeholders as part of a change management process. So, don't you? You're going to have people who are really keen on something, people who are at the kind of other end of that, and a broad spectrum of everybody in between. And it's almost been dealt with as a kind of a people bit, just in relation to how they deal with change. But with this kind of project, we wanted to look at how we can layer trust within that and how we deal with different, I suppose, stakeholder groups specifically in relation to that as well.
So almost like it was a technology agnostic project, hung off Gen AI because it's the show in town at the moment. Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
fair?
so I suppose the Gen AI, it's the current kind of contextual wrapper for all of this. But what we were keen to explore was to get kind of the underlying, I suppose, theoretical and academic knowledge to be able to, whatever is the next emerging piece of tech, be able to apply those principles to whatever area of technology we're looking at.
So trust you've identified as an important element. I mean, is there something, I suppose, in the context of the business of law and the way that technology is challenging legal services and that transition to what next generation services might look like? How do you see this project informing that or being applied?
Yeah, so I mean, lawyers are used to being the one giving advice and being
The trusted individual.
yes, and being the one kind of giving the correct advice and everybody kind of listening to them and acting. And a lot of this technology almost flips that on their head. So the lawyers then aren't necessarily the ones who know whether a piece of technology is going to work, know how best to use it, know how best to explain it. And we're suddenly throwing various systems at them, going, "Well, would you just give it a try? Kind of almost trust us and let's see how it goes." Against a backdrop, I suppose, particularly with Gen AI, of not being able to guarantee that it will be correct, because we all know it hallucinates even with kind of best efforts to try and reduce that. And it's how do we, where I suppose the business of law, isn't it? Your bread and butter is giving correct legal advice. That's what we're all here to do. So how do you use Gen AI or other systems to enhance that without ultimately causing people to think, actually, is that correct? And we're just pushing time down to a different bit of the process.
And it sort of touches away in a way on the regulatory framework within which lawyers operate, doesn't it? Because I'm thinking about financial services and some of the other previous guests we've had, highly regulated, very consumer driven. But it's the personal level of responsibility, isn't it? Which is quite unique. So when you're asking an individual to trust something, well, oh yeah, it's a big leap, isn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose ultimately, regardless of what system or technology you're using, you as the lawyer giving the advice ultimately carry the can. So you are the one who has to say, yes, that is correct. It goes out in my name, and that's the advice, regardless of how you've done that. And again, for new entrants coming in, early careers, people coming into firms, they've had a very different way of learning. So they've done, 101 legal skills, which is it's not quite paper anymore, is it? It's going to go and look on all the reputable databases, and this is how you search properly. To actually, well, now let's add Gen AI onto that, and it's creating a lot of extra information for people to have to sift through and think, is that correct? Do I trust it?
That's almost generating
How
more
do
tasks
I-
as well as having
Yeah,
so
how
some
do I
speed, but
corroborate? How do I
you-
corroborate that? So, and again, especially with people either moving to new training seat or people coming into law, you can see, can't you, how superficially Gen AI in particular is a really attractive piece of technology. So if you're suddenly moving seat every 6 months and day one you're in a new seat and it's a totally different area law, and it's like draft a letter to a client, draft a document, and you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. There might be some precedents. You might have spoken to the previous trainee. You can see how having something sat on your desk where you can ask it is actually,
Yeah.
it's a real comfort to be able to go, wow, that would be good. But unless you can spot whether the information it's giving you is correct, then potentially all we're doing is storing up problems for later in that process, with people having to spend more time supervising or that kind of thing. Or I suppose worst case, trainees believing that everything that comes out of these systems is correct, and that becomes their own almost internal precedent that then they're sharing with everybody. So it's that real kind of awareness of, it is the fact checking, it's the not. So we're almost going, trust us as a team to roll out technology, but actually you can't always trust the tech because we want you to be actively questioning it. And it's trying to balance all of that around the day job of giving advice to clients.
Yeah, and still harnessing the efficiencies that
Yeah.
it's meant to be giving you.
Yeah.
But it's so black box, isn't it? Yeah, and it's knowing what's the right level of knowledge for that individual to have to be able to trust, like you say, or to understand or get comfortable, because it doesn't mean they have to know how algorithms
No.
are made, etc., and how it all generally hangs together. So that's like you can see how there's a really big, complicated,
Yeah.
fearful space.
Yeah.
What's been the process then? So identified challenges,
Yeah.
explored that a little bit now, and you've come into the project. What have you used the project to do, or how have you tackled it? And you talked a little bit there, mentioned academia, etc. So
Yeah, so I think that's been the major output from our project, is to have that academic input. So I suppose law as an industry, we're very good, aren't we, at thinking we're unique, and we're always the first one to have ever grappled with a problem. And actually, if you step back and look, there's loads of other industries that we can look at who've either technologically ahead or have considered these kind of challenges perhaps in a slightly different context, and that you can recycle that learning from. So absolutely don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So we've worked with a brilliant team as part of TIPS and external professors to understand trust in a lot of different environments. So in particular fintech, and again a kind of similar parallel environment with heavy regulation and that kind of thing, to actually understand what they've been doing, how they've approached it, and to learn those lessons and try and put them into how we work as a firm.
what's it meant in practice? So how many people from your firm, what's been the engagement, or has it been quite arm's length?
So it's been, I suppose, pretty much just the product and innovation team. And I suppose what it's caused us to consider and look at how we do differently is our different levels of engagement with groups of stakeholders. So we've always dealt with stakeholders almost like the old kind of change curve, and you ones at the bottom who absolutely don't want it, and the ones at the top who are absolutely evangelical, and everybody in the middle. And we're not really layered levels of trust into that, and how that changes between different groups. And again, not just between different groups, even between projects. So you can have people who'll trust one particular project or piece of tech but won't another. So a lot more kind of upfront, almost pre-mortem discussions around actually not only what's just the kind of the change impact, but have we considered from a trust perspective what kind of doing this project might do to the overall portfolio and balance of what we do as a team. Because I suppose, again, we're, as a products and innovation department, there's loads of different levels in trust. So if you kind of go back to my organ donation scenario, the firm trusts us as a department to be exploring and evaluating and horizon scanning the right kinds of technology, and filtering out the ones to try and not. So there's that kind of level in trust that those kind of gatekeeper steps will happen. And I trust my team to do that, and for them to be piloting and deciding what goes through and to next steps. And then as a firm, the users and the people within the pilot are trusting us to essentially not be wasting their time.
Yes.
So they want to be doing things where they already know that there is some utility to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have asked them. Because what we don't want to do as a products and innovation team is to lose all that goodwill we've earned over the years, or to be the boy who cries wolf, and to go, right, here's another piece of tech, and almost when they see you coming down the corridor as well, going, yeah, what's she shoving at us next? And again, that fail fast. So we go to people, this is where something's up to. It's past like level 1. We now think it's at the stage where actually some lawyer input would be really useful, and again will help us decide whether that proceeds or not. But those kind of multifaceted levels and layers of trust that we probably just hadn't thought about hard enough. Because again, in the same way that lawyers are there doing the day job of firewalls, we were there in the day job of doing pilots and next projects. So it's that chance really with projects like this to kind of pause, to step back, to reflect, to learn things that we wouldn't have otherwise had the time or the knowledge to find out, and then to work kind of with the broader TIPS team as to how do we put that into practice.
Has your project at all, or maybe the methodologies or thinking about trust in these new ways, gone into the client sphere at all? Have you got a different relationship? Are they interested in whether you're using AI or not? Or is it still sort of that traditional, well, we rely on what you say, don't care how you got there kind of?
Yeah, so I suppose Gen AI is more than other technology clients have been more interested in. I think kind of back to that earlier point where they've used it in different contexts and, their own life, that kind of thing. So they're familiar with that technology. Um, as you would expect, clients have a very broad range of views about it. There are some clients who are keen on it. There are equally some clients who say you can't use it. And then everything in between. And again, I suppose much in the same way that we're trying to engage with internal stakeholders on it, we're trying to kind of engage with clients in a way that accords with their risk appetite, their levels of trust, their willingness to pilot. So yeah, it will certainly play a role in that as well.
So given all of that, I'll let you do work on trust and contextualizing it in Gen AI. Is it just hype, or is there something to this in the context of legal services?
Yeah.
In your opinion?
I think, there is something in it. Quite what that something looks like day to day, I think is quite difficult for law firms to grapple with. So you've got such a spread of technology, even with generative AI. You've got legal specific technology. You've got general productivity tools. You can make that training videos. Almost where do you play with it? Where are the best use cases? Where is that return on investment? There was some interesting research out recently where I think of the top 100 firms, only one said yes to having been able to monetize a return on investment for Gen AI.
Oh, really?
And that was a top 10 firm, given how they'd kind of sliced the data. And if you think about how expensive this technology is, as with all projects, there has to be that kind of commercial side to it. There has to be something that that works for a firm. And it's very difficult to try and quantify that. And I don't think anybody has really got the kind of the secret sauce to that, coupled with almost a very changing market. So I think there's something like 500 odd legal specific pieces of Gen AI software now.
It's rapidly.
It's rapid.
Even every day, it's probably a new one, and one goes and one fails.
I could sit and have demos like constantly. And again, that changes pricing models. You've got existing technology that we've all had where Gen AI becomes on top of it. And again, different pricing models. So I think for lots of law firms, it's trying to find use cases that work for them and their clients. And it's that good old fashioned, isn't it? Work out what problem you're trying to solve and actually what is the best solution to doing that. So we see Gen AI as one of many solutions almost available in the innovation toolkit. So rather than it being, we've just got a team who are only doing Gen AI, it's a bit like the thing with a hammer, isn't it? If you've only got a hammer, everything needs a hammer. So, there's lots of problems that come to us that people go, I think I need Gen AI to that. And actually you explore it and you're like, do you know what, even a good bit of old fashioned automation or RPA or something will fix that in a better way. So it's to be using it as part of your general processes. And if it's the right fit for that particular problem to solve, then yeah, absolutely go for it.
Given that interesting statistic about monetization of it and how many are using it versus actually successful doing it, basically no one is except for the one, and it's a very large law firm. What would be your advice or elements do you think, if you think of a small law firms, many practices the nature of the market, it gets quite small quite quickly in that groundswell. What would be your thoughts for them when thinking about innovation and this type of journey?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for regardless of size of firm, the underlying issues are the same on. It's just a question of scale. And I think that's what's always really nice about the kind of legal innovation community when you chat to, kind of colleagues and peers at other firms, regardless of how many millions of noughts there are after a figure for revenue, the underlying issues are kind of the people, the process, the technology. Which actually, even for a smaller law firm, means you can still kind of dip your toe in because you're not going to be facing any kind of different level of challenge compared to other firms. And I think, potentially if you're a smaller firm, maybe even a little bit easier to influence your stakeholders. You've got a smaller group to be engaging with to start off with. Because sometimes having massive groups and a pile of people with different opinions,
massive voices,
does not, you don't want to be deciding by committee and stuff.
No.
So,
however,
even that whole fail fast mentality, I think applies regardless of size of firm. I think what's difficult if you haven't got dedicated kind of innovation resource, is where does that fit? How does that fit either around IT or, you know, a key lawyer's day job? How do you incentivize people to want to explore that technology for you?
I think it's interesting listening to you talking about just how much thought and energy and effort is going into it, even before this project. And if you're a small law firm, you just don't have that.
No.
But the market isn't ready. I mean, we hear AI and Gen AI, the government's obviously very keen on it right now, that whole adoption journey, because that's where growth could come from, and opportunity and efficiencies, which would hopefully service a smaller law firm and professional services practice. But it's not there yet then, is it?
Yeah, and I suppose even the procurement side, if you're a smaller firm, what do you do with 550 things just of legal specific to try? Where do you, we've got, teams of people looking at this, surveying the market, seeing what's happening and what to try and what potential use cases we've got. So, I think regardless of size, it's working out what problem you're trying to solve and being really crystal clear on that, and not being, I suppose, kind of guided by, shiny demos and stuff. Yes, we all know the demo works as a demo because it's apple pie order, it's their documents and things. And actually, law firms are messy. Data's messy. The way people work is messy. Even if you've got a standard operating procedure and workflow, people find ways of getting around it. So it's, when you bring technology back in, and that's the whole benefit, isn't it, of having a pilot, is actually seeing, does it live up to expectation? That's not just with Gen AI, that's with any of the technology. Essentially, does the marketing spin hold true when it's in the...
And it's the minerals, isn't it, as well? It's the things you didn't think were going to get disrupted.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously got my dishwashing at home,
Yeah.
just because I've got a dishwasher to do it, those are jobs that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
It was a different job. Those have got at least come in, and it's exploring those. If you go back to work with tips, and thinking about the project, what impact or results, what are you seeing now? We're some months, years into doing this.
Yeah.
What are you starting to see within the firm?
Yeah, so I think just, I suppose, specifically within the team, a much greater awareness of how we set up these projects, and a bit of a further look ahead as to what, again, unintended consequences might happen from doing a pilot to a project in a particular way. And I think shifting how we communicate and engage. So, hopefully people will still continue to pilot, because ultimately that's the aim for us. If we were sat here in 5 years...
You don't have destroyed trust further by doing
If we were sat here in 5 years...
Actually, no more experimenting.
If we were sat here in 5 years and we've got whatever is the latest technology, I'd like to be able to say, well, here we actually, that methodology ran true. We think about trust really early on, and actually that's played a really important role in wherever the next piece of technology is. And actually, I've still got people clamoring down my door to want to take part in these projects, because that would be the worst thing, is if you have
just avoid.
If you have a project and people are like, oh, actually I don't want to do that, because there's been so many examples where they might have thought it didn't work. So it's constantly trying to re-engage with the kind of the law firm community, and being kind of explaining why. And again, even with pilots, it's been really, again, we don't want to be kind of the salespeople of the tech. You want to be going, do you know what's good at this? It's not good at this. Or can you try it on that? We don't know if it'll work. And I think it's those really open and upfront conversations.
Being honest about.
Yeah. So some of it might be, we think there's some legs in this, but actually we've played with it in the way that like ex-lawyers do. Could you actually have a go day to day and tell us if that rings true? And it's okay if it doesn't. That feedback is as valuable.
Yes.
But because we've not wasted your time, and you can see that there's a decision and an output with that, you're key to keep engaging with us.
So if you had one piece of advice then, one takeaway, anyone listening, downloading this at a later date, what would be that takeaway to you?
That I suppose you can't overplan these things and kind of do the upfront thought. So actually, running a pilot for 2, 3, 4 weeks should be almost the quickest part of a pilot process. And I think the more kind of upfront effort there is, thinking about how you're going to test it, how you're going to engage with people, I think will really play dividends.
Fabulous. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thanks
It's
for me.
super to hear about your project, and look forward to, well, hopefully having you back in 5 years to see if all those things came true.
Whatever the tech is.
Thanks so much, Kat.
Thank you.